I was the outcast at family gatherings, until this happened. I was once invisible in my own family, despised, excluded from the family photo, simply because I dared to chase my dreams. But when my grandmother passed away, an unexpected will turned everything upside down. $25 million and a dark family secret were revealed. Will I forgive them or make them pay? The story begins here. Fairhaven, an upscale suburban town, where oak-lined streets lead to magnificent mansions, lush gardens, and peaceful scenery as if from a painting. But beneath its perfect exterior lies a world full of secrets, seeds of envy, and pride that sprout within families, where reputation always matters more than anything. The Parker family, with their lavish annual parties, has always been the centerpiece of the community. Every major holiday, especially Christmas, their mansion is filled with sparkling lights, laughter, and success stories of their children. Parents, siblings, and relatives are all proud of their accomplishments, with no one lacking perfection. But amid all the glitter, Ethan Parker, the black sheep of the family, is always the outsider. At 28, Ethan is the CEO of DataWave Innovations, a multi-million-dollar technology company, but his work never seems to be respected by his family. His mother, Evelyn, still calls his job a computer game, a dismissive term for the career he built with heart and mind. His Aunt Margaret, who constantly boasts about her successful grandchildren, praises his cousin Lucas, a renowned doctor in the community, and his cousin Sophia, a promising young lawyer. Uncle Henry, who never speaks about Ethan but takes pride in his own kids, always regards DataWave as just a little game from an underachiever. At the Christmas party, the atmosphere is cheerful, lively, and filled with pride. Ethan, arriving late due to work, brings an expensive bottle of wine, hoping it will catch his family's attention. But when he walks in, he receives no welcome, only cold stares from his relatives. They already have their own seating arrangements, a space reserved for children and the overlooked, and Ethan, despite bringing a prized gift, is relegated to the corner of the table, sitting next to his 6-year-old niece and a high chair. "Uncle Ethan, don't you like eating here?" his niece asks, making him feel like an outsider. Ethan smiles awkwardly, but inside, he feels only one thing hurt. He tries to remain silent but can't help noticing the warmth of the family photo. He is asked to take a picture, but excluded from the main photo. "Only family members," his mother says, as if he isn't part of this family. As the party continues, Ethan's loneliness becomes clearer than ever. He finds some comfort in looking at DataWave, the company he founded and built. This is the only place where he feels valued. He wonders if his family will ever truly recognize his success, or if all they see is a failure, a dropout chasing unrealistic dreams. All his hope in his family gradually fades as he recalls a flashback. A year ago, in a family chat group, Ethan tried to share his achievements at DataWave, the big contracts he had signed, the groundbreaking progress in cloud technology. But his story was ignored. No one responded. Meanwhile, a post about Lucas getting a promotion received dozens of congratulations and admiring messages. This clear distinction made Ethan feel invisible in his own family. His heart aches, but he doesn't let it show. He simply smiles faintly, trying to convince himself that things will change one day. He hopes that one day, his family will see him not through the lens of success, but for who he is, for the values he has created. Ethan doesn't give up. He continues to work, persistently building DataWave, not for the recognition of his family, but because of his own belief in his abilities and the great goals he set. He hopes that one day, his company will not just be a personal achievement, but a proof to his family that he can succeed, whether they ever accept him or not. Ethan knows his journey is long, but he is determined not to let anything, not even his family, stop him from moving forward. The Pinewood Haven Nursing Home is located on a quiet street, a few blocks away from downtown Fairhaven. The atmosphere here seems quieter, a stillness that Ethan couldn't feel during the family parties or at work. The long hallways, with the heavy smell of disinfectant, and the sound of an old piano echoing from the room where Mrs. Eleanor sat, were the only places where he felt he wasn't an outsider. Every Wednesday evening, Ethan spent a few hours visiting Mrs. Eleanor, the 92-year-old woman who had become the only candle in the darkness of his life. Each time he visited, he brought homemade butter cookies made from the recipe she had taught him during the summers of his childhood, when the two of them baked together in the old wooden house she had once lived in. Mrs. Eleanor was the only one who didn't see Ethan as a failure. Despite being 92 years old, she still maintained sharpness and a strong intellect. Whenever he talked about DataWave, from its early steps to its multi-million-dollar contracts, she listened attentively, as if she were an important business partner. She never missed a detail of Ethan's story, even asking about the cloud algorithm and the strategies he applied to build the company. "You're talking about the cloud algorithm, but not mentioning its foundation. Do you think you've missed something, Mrs.?" Eleanor would often ask questions like this, with a curiosity and understanding of the tech world that Ethan couldn't find in anyone else in his family. Thus, the Wednesday evenings gradually became an important part of Ethan's life. They shared stories not only about work, but also about life. Mrs. Eleanor told him about the early days of her startup in 1950 when she began her construction company, despite society's skepticism and prejudice. You think the indifference of your family towards you is the worst thing, but I've been through days when the world left me behind, and I still got up. As long as you don't let anyone define you, you'll find the light. Ethan felt the understanding in her words, and that was one of the reasons he spent those precious hours each week visiting her. The image of Mrs. Eleanor, though frail, still resilient, was the only source of motivation that kept him standing strong in the face of his family's indifference. His family, who always saw his value through their eyes, always saw him as someone who couldn't succeed, someone without a future. His family hardly ever visited Mrs. Eleanor. Aunt Margaret had only come by twice in 6 years, and each time, it was only to ask about her will. Uncle Henry sent flowers for her birthday, but never remembered the special day. Ethan's cousins, who had always kept their distance from her, didn't even mention her when they gathered. Mrs. Eleanor had become a burden to them, a part of the past they wanted to forget. But to Ethan, she was the only bright spot, someone with whom he could feel warmth and genuine recognition. In their conversations, Mrs. Eleanor gradually helped Ethan realize something: he didn't need recognition from his family because his worth didn't depend on their gaze. You can't live for their gazes. You have to live for yourself. As long as you keep faith in yourself, the world will recognize you. Each of her words was like a dose of spiritual medicine that helped Ethan overcome the difficulties in his work and personal life. Although she was the only one by his side, it made Ethan gradually feel the absence in family parties or meetings with other family members. The hurt was still there, but he had learned to accept it and no longer felt abandoned. One evening, as the two of them sat together, Mrs. Eleanor suddenly revealed something Ethan had never expected. Do you know? I've kept a journal about what happened with our family. The indifference, the times you were forgotten. I've recorded it all, and I have a plan to fix everything. Ethan looked at her, unable to fully comprehend what she was trying to say, but the determination in her eyes made him feel that something big was waiting ahead. You'll understand, Ethan. Everything will change, and you'll be the one to lead that change. In that moment, Ethan felt as if he had found a true companion, someone he could trust and rely on, someone who had helped him find the light in his darkest days. And though he didn't know exactly what the future held, he knew that with Mrs. Eleanor's support, he could face his family and the great challenges waiting for him. This winter arrived late, but the cold still pierced the air in the cramped room, with faint light from the overhead lamp. The old law office was tucked away in a quiet street of Fairhaven, and the atmosphere here always carried a special heaviness, as if all the secrets, all the truths, were hidden behind the oak wood doors. Ethan sat there, on the hard wooden chair, gripping the will of Mrs. Eleanor tightly. His face was tense, sweat soaking his forehead, despite the room not being too warm. On that day, Mrs. Eleanor passed away, forever. Though Ethan knew it was coming, he still couldn't fathom facing it so suddenly. When she passed, he was sitting by her side, holding her hand in the small room at Pinewood Haven Nursing Home, as he did every Wednesday evening. It was their last moment together, a peaceful yet sorrowful moment. He felt as though he had lost the only person who truly understood and cherished him. The news of her passing came to Ethan through a cold message from his mother. Evelyn, Mrs. Eleanor has passed. We'll hold the funeral this weekend. No words of sympathy, no inquiries or condolences. The family had concerns, but they had forgotten the real relationships, those that couldn't be measured by wealth. While Ethan was grappling with this immense loss, his family was holding an engagement party for Lucas, the doctor they had always praised. And of course, as always, Ethan was not invited. He had once thought that one day there would be a time, a place where he could stand with his family, be recognized and respected. But this time, like every other time before, he was left behind. The reading of Mrs. Eleanor's will took place in a tense atmosphere. The Parker family, who were usually dazzling in their parties and luxurious lifestyle, sat around the long table, still and silent, their faces tense. They all expected that the $25 million estate would be divided evenly, especially the lakeside mansion, the considerable investment portfolio, and the construction company she had painstakingly built. But what they received was a shock. Mrs. Eleanor left them nothing but words in the will: disappointment for Aunt Margaret, sorrow for Uncle Henry, and nothing for the other grandchildren. And then, she bequeathed her entire estate to Ethan, the only one she believed had truly given love and care over the past 7 years. No way! Margaret screamed, her face contorted in anger. She's lost her mind. I've devoted my whole life to this family, and she left everything to Ethan. Her voice echoed in the tense air, as if everything had collapsed before her eyes. Ethan felt a wave of emotions rush through him, both shocked and deeply moved. It felt like a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders, but also like a kind of liberation. Finally, Mrs. Eleanor had recognized him, but it couldn't be that simple. Each word in the will felt like a cut into his soul. He felt her love, but he also felt the price he had to pay. As he sat there, thoughts and emotions swirling around like a storm, an unexpected letter from Mrs. Eleanor appeared. It wasn't part of the official will, but something she had left specifically for Ethan. A letter containing all the things she couldn't say in her lifetime. In the letter, she revealed that she had documented all the indifference and manipulation of the Parker family towards him. I couldn't let them define you. They never saw your worth. But I know you will find a way to change everything, because you deserve it. She also revealed an important detail, a safe containing documents about unpaid loans and financial fraud the Parker family had been involved in for years. These were irrefutable pieces of evidence of the greed and deception within the family that Ethan had always suspected. Ethan read the letter, his heart heavy. The sense of loss over Mrs. Eleanor still lingered in his heart, but now he understood that she had prepared him for an inevitable battle. Yet, he wasn't ready to face the people he had once loved, those who had made him feel invisible all these years. The Parker family reacted fiercely to this. They were not only angry but threatened legal action, trying to overturn the will with vague reasons. But Ethan wasn't afraid. Though he still felt a part of him was lost in the family, he began to realize that his worth didn't depend on them. Their threats, their anger, only strengthened his resolve, a resolve that he would not let the family's lies control his life anymore. Things had now gone too far. Ethan was no longer the shy, insignificant boy he once was. He stood at a crucial crossroads, where he had to face the truth and continue down the path Mrs. Eleanor had taught him to take. Henry's mansion was as grand as a small palace, but the atmosphere during that dinner was heavy and pretentious. The long wooden dining table was laid out with lavish dishes. The warm light from the golden chandelier above cast down on the table, creating a glamorous yet cold scene. The glossy black leather chairs, an environment that seemed to have been built to showcase family unity. But in reality, it was a perfect performance, where everyone only pretended to love each other. Ethan entered, and the first thing he noticed was the sudden change in his family's behavior. There were no more cold stares, no more criticisms or contempt. Instead, they treated him like a hero. They hurried to offer him a seat of honor, a place he had never been allowed to sit before. Aunt Margaret smiled brightly, even praising his work, saying that Datawave was an admirable achievement. Uncle Henry proudly boasted that the family had finally recognized Ethan's worth. But in Ethan's heart, this falsehood suffocated him. Everything felt fake. They were rewriting history to cover up the insults they had thrown at him in the past, as if everything had been forgotten, as if he had never endured their coldness and contempt. He was tired, and the patience he had tried so hard to maintain over the years suddenly became a burden. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the tension in the air. He couldn't take it anymore. He stood up, forcefully pushing his chair back, drawing everyone's attention. "I don't need your pity," he said, his voice strong but still cold. He began playing the recordings he had collected over the past 5 years, recordings containing all the insults his family had hurled at him. "Listen here," Ethan said, his eyes locking on them, every word coming out with resolve. The screen displayed the recordings. Margaret's voice came. First, "Ethan is a failure. He'll never succeed." Next was Sophia, "Ethan is the shame of the family. Don't talk about him anymore." And then came Henry's mocking laugh. "That dreamer. He has no future." Each of those words, each criticism was like a knife wound to his heart. He couldn't believe that his family had treated him this way. He continued recounting the nights when Mrs. Eleanor waited for the family to visit, but only he showed up. "She never stopped believing in you, but you left her alone. Every time I visited, she always asked about you, asked when you would come, but you never came." The entire room fell silent. No one uttered a word. All that remained was panic and shame. The people who had once looked down on him could now no longer look him in the eye. Everything from before was suddenly exposed. The truth laid bare beyond denial. "What do you want me to do?" "Apologize, repent." Ethan scoffed. "I'll give you exactly what you gave me and her nothing." His words echoed in the silent room. A declaration that any further compromise was over. They could do nothing but sit there, enduring the truth they had long tried to hide. Ethan didn't feel joy seeing his family panic. He didn't feel satisfaction. He only felt liberated, as though he had thrown off a massive burden. He was no longer the shy son seeking recognition from his family. He had become his own man, and that made him feel free. As the tension in the room gradually subsided, Ethan looked at each person in the family. "You can blame me. You can threaten me. But the truth will always be the truth. I don't need you to know my worth." These words, with a determined tone, were his final declaration. He no longer waited for change from his family, because he knew that change had to come from within himself. From this moment on, every step Ethan took would no longer be influenced by his family or their expectations. He had decided to stop seeking approval from those who did not appreciate his true worth. Those tense moments during that dinner were not only when Ethan exposed his family's falsehoods, but also the moment he found the strength to decide his own fate. After the confrontation at Henry's mansion, Ethan was no longer the man of weakness and endurance. He no longer sought acceptance from his family, for he had realized that they would never see him for who he truly was. However, what he didn't anticipate was the power of deceit and greed that would lead the Parker family to a complete downfall, with him, the one they had once despised, being the witness to that destruction. The Parker family did not easily accept failure, although they couldn't deny Mrs. Eleanor's will and the irrefutable evidence that Ethan had presented. They still didn't give up. Margaret, Ethan's aunt, could not bear the truth that Mrs. Eleanor had left all her wealth to Ethan, whom she had always seen as a failure. Therefore, Margaret and the family immediately began a campaign to reclaim the estate by any means necessary, from emotional tactics to legal maneuvers. They sent Ethan voicemail apologies, tearful handwritten letters in which they said they were wrong, that they now understood Ethan's worth, and that they wanted to come back together and be a real family. But Ethan was no longer naive. He wouldn't let himself be drawn into these games any longer. These apologies couldn't erase the past, couldn't fade the indifference his family had shown him for so many years. When they couldn't win with emotional tactics, they turned to legal action. A powerful team of lawyers was mobilized to challenge the will, threatening to sue if the estate was not redistributed, but all their efforts were in vain. Ethan's lawyer, who had carefully collected evidence beforehand, presented a crucial video, a video that Mrs. Eleanor had recorded in her final days, confirming that she was fully lucid when making the will and affirming that her decision was entirely voluntary. Additionally, documents from the safe contained evidence of unpaid loans and financial fraud the Parker family had committed over the years. These were undeniable pieces of evidence, and the Parker family could do nothing to reverse the situation. The consequences didn't stop there. Margaret, Ethan's aunt, lost the lakeside mansion because she couldn't pay the bank debts. The lavish parties and fancy meals were now a thing of the past. Her mansion was sealed, valuable possessions were seized, and all that remained was an empty house, no longer filled with light or pride as it once was. The pain Margaret felt as she witnessed everything she had taken from her was indescribable, but it was the consequence of the greed and indifference she had shown to Ethan and Mrs. Eleanor. Uncle Henry, who had always prided himself on his career and restaurant chain, couldn't escape his fate either. His restaurant chain went bankrupt due to unpaid debts and poor management. Henry couldn't handle the pressure and was forced to close all of his establishments. The neon lights of the once bustling restaurants, which he had called his pride, were now extinguished, leaving only faint traces of a fallen empire. Lucas, Ethan's cousin, the one the family had always praised for his successful medical career, also didn't escape this harsh fate. When Lucas's fiancée found out that he was no longer the family heir, she left him, leaving Lucas alone in an empty apartment. Lucas was no longer the one everyone praised, no longer the one who was expected to succeed. And now he had to face the truth. He had nothing left but his lost reputation. Ethan stood from a distance, watching his family's collapse, feeling both relieved and heartbroken. He didn't take joy in witnessing this breakup, but a part of him felt freedom. Those who had once trampled on him, those who had called him a failure, were now facing the consequences of their own greed and indifference. Their defeat was not Ethan's victory, but the result of the wrong choices they had made for all those years. As the Parker family struggled with their collapse, Ethan gradually realized that he no longer depended on them. He had discarded the expectations of his family and found his true worth through his work and what he had built. Mrs. Eleanor's legacy, not the material wealth, but the lessons of resilience and self-respect, was the thing he cherished most. But deep down, Ethan couldn't help but wrestle with one question. Should he forgive his family? Should he let go of everything and move forward in peace? He wondered if he had become too rigid, too closed off to be able to forgive those who had betrayed and hurt him all these years. But in the end, Ethan knew that forgiveness wasn't something he could give away easily. He had been through too much pain and hurt, and only he had the right to decide whether to let these people back into his life. He knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to continue his life, not for the family, but for himself and Mrs. Eleanor's legacy. The light of the autumn morning gently filtered through the tall trees, casting its glow on the transparent windows of the Eleanor Parker Community Center. The door opened, and the laughter of children echoed, blending with the lively sounds of a programming class. This center, renovated from Mrs. Eleanor's lakeside mansion, had become a place where the dreams of many underprivileged children were nurtured, where every child was given the opportunity to learn and grow, regardless of their background. A portrait of Mrs. Eleanor hung proudly in one corner of the room, with the words, "Where everyone has value," written beneath the frame. The children, each from a different circumstance, felt that this place was not just a learning center, but a special place where they felt respected and loved. Though Mrs. Eleanor was no longer there, her legacy, Her perseverance, sacrifice, and belief in the worth of every individual was preserved and continued through each class, through every step the children took. Ethan stood at the door, looking into the classroom where the children were intently learning how to code. Each line of code typed on the keyboard, and he felt a warmth rise in his heart. This was what he had wanted, not just success in his career, but to make a real change in the community, for those like Mrs. Eleanor, who had once believed in him. Since expanding DataWave, Ethan had spent most of his time developing the Eleanor Parker Foundation, a charity that helps disadvantaged children learn technology, giving them the chance to access modern educational platforms. He found joy in this work, not only because it brought prosperity to the company, but also because it helped him fulfill part of Mrs. Eleanor's legacy. One afternoon, as Ethan sat in a small cafe, the soft light from yellow lamps illuminated the table, and the strong scent of roasted coffee filled the air. A figure entered. Sophia, the girl who had once called him the shame, had changed. In a simple white shirt and with a hesitant look in her eyes, Sophia walked up to his table. "Ethan," she began, her voice soft but sincere. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was jealous of your success and Mrs. Eleanor's. I abandoned both of you without realizing what I was doing." Ethan looked at her, a feeling of confusion passing through him. These words were not what he had expected from her, but they were what he needed. Sophia, who had once seemed arrogant and insincere, was now standing before him, admitting her mistakes. "I can't change the past," Sophia continued, "but I want you to know that I deeply regret it. You are the strongest person I've ever known, and I've learned the value of sincerity and effort." Ethan sat in silence for a moment, feeling the sincerity in her words. He knew that people could change, and he had changed himself. He couldn't live in the past forever, and he understood that sometimes forgiveness had to be given to those who could reflect on themselves and change. Though there was still some doubt in his heart, Ethan decided to give Sophia a chance. He smiled gently and said, "Thank you for the apology. I think we can both learn from each other, and I believe we can rebuild this relationship, based on honesty." Their relationship could never go back to what it once was, but they both understood that forgiveness was not an easy decision, but rather a process, a choice, and gradually, they began anew, building from a fresh foundation. Not long after, Ethan invited Sophia to his wedding. It wasn't a grand event with the Parker family, but an intimate ceremony with only close friends and her, the one who had been part of his journey. In a small but warm space, Sophia gave an emotional speech, sharing about her transformation and the valuable lessons she had learned from Ethan. "Ethan is not only a friend, but also the strongest person I've ever known," Sophia said, her gaze sincere. "He didn't just build a successful company. He built a community, a family that I've always admired, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to learn from him." Her words were not just compliments, but a genuine recognition of Ethan's worth, something he had always longed for from his family but had never received. Now, he no longer sought recognition from anyone. He had found his self-worth in his actions, in what he had created, and in the people he had helped. The story ended with the image of Ethan standing in front of the Eleanor Parker Community Center, watching the children walk into the classroom with hopeful eyes. He felt Mrs. Eleanor's legacy live on in their smiles, in the joy of learning, and in the change he had helped bring about. In Mrs. Eleanor's safe, he found an old letter. The words written in it still echoed in Ethan's heart. "You are my light, Ethan. Shine for others." Ethan smiled, knowing that he had found his new flock, the place where he truly belonged.